guys, I'm Ronnie, and today we're going to be talking about nitrogen fixation and the nitrogen cycle. So there are 6 elements that make up almost all living matter: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, and the subject of today's video, nitrogen. Now, our bodies need nitrogen for important processes like making proteins, making RNA, and even making DNA, right? But how do we get nitrogen? Well, we get it from the plants and animals that we eat, that have also eaten plants. And plants need nitrogen too, right? So how do they get it? Well, crops mainly get nitrogen from fertilizers, but they can also get it from cover crops like clover or bacteria in the soil that perform a process called nitrogen fixation. Plants that aren't crops rely mainly on nitrogen fixation. And today we're basically going to answer these questions. What is the nitrogen cycle? What is nitrogen fixation? And why are they important? And before we can kind of answer that first question, we need to talk a little bit more about nitrogen itself. Remember, nitrogen is a major component of chlorophyll in plants and amino acids in proteins in animals, which includes us, remember? Like, we need nitrogen to make DNA and RNA and proteins. Now, nitrogen gas makes up nearly 80% of the atmosphere, but plants and animals and us, we can't use nitrogen in that gaseous form. So how do plants and animals, how do we get nitrogen? Well, we get it through the process called the nitrogen cycle, which shows how nitrogen moves through the environment. Kind of like how water moves through the environment in the water cycle, nitrogen moves through the environment in the nitrogen cycle. So you've got this nitrogen floating around in the atmosphere and the environment, and certain types of bacteria use an enzyme called nitrogenase to convert nitrogen gas into ammonia, which is NH3. And then another kind of bacteria, nitrifying bacteria, turn that ammonia into nitrite, NO2-, and nitrate, NO3-, which plants can absorb with their roots. Now, some of that nitrate gets denitrified by another kind of bacteria and returned to the atmosphere where it starts the cycle again. But the nitrate that comes from the plants that the plants absorb, animals eat those plants and get their nitrogen. And once they've passed their food and it breaks down into ammonium, that nitrogen continues through the cycle again. So we're kind of part of that because we got to eat too, right? Now, the first part of this process is what we're going to dive deeper into today. So remember, we've got that nitrogen, it's floating around in the environment, and we've got that nitrogen-fixing bacteria living in the soil. And those nitrogen-fixing bacteria, they turn that nitrogen into ammonia, or NH3. And the process that these bacteria go through, again, is called nitrogen fixation. What's really interesting, though, is that nitrogen-fixing bacteria called rhizobia can actually form symbiotic relationships with some plants, like legumes, providing them with nitrogen directly, right? Like the legume family, which includes plants like clovers and soybeans, they grow these nodules on their roots, and it attracts these rhizobia. Now, these rhizobia fix the nitrogen into a form that the plants can use directly, and in return, the plant provides carbon in a form that the bacteria can use directly. Super cool, right? And when these plants die and they break down in the soil, that nitrogen becomes available to other plants around. And this makes legumes like clovers a really good cover crop since they help fertilize the soil for crops that are planted afterwards, which we eat. So today, we basically learned that bacteria in the soil perform a process called nitrogen fixation, which turns atmospheric nitrogen into ammonia and helps start the entire nitrogen cycle. We also learned that nitrogen fixation is an important part of that nitrogen cycle, which is, again, how nitrogen moves through our environment. Now, the nitrogen cycle and nitrogen fixation are really vital processes that help plants grow, including the plants that we eat, which helps us get the nitrogen that we need to perform those bodily processes that we talked about. I just want to say a quick thank you to Canva for providing all the visual elements from this presentation. And here we go. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys.